Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Logtech Live. I'm Eric Johnson, your host, as always. Well, except for the times that I'm gone and I have a guest host, but virtually always. Welcome back if you are a regular viewer. Always appreciate the support. If this is your first time, we have a great guest today. Actually, the first time in the history of Logtech Live that I have a repeat guest. So, very excited to welcome back my guest today. I'll get into her in just a second, who she is and what we're going to talk about. But a few things before we kick off on a sort of overcast Friday in the DC area. Not too bad. We're definitely in those weird times of like sometimes it's boiling hot and sometimes it's still cool and rainy here. But few things to talk about over the next few months that I'll be attending. So I'm going to be at Home Delivery World in about 3 weeks. Really excited. That Sarah at Let's Talk Supply Chain will also be there. So we're going to have a big meetup of the whole Let's Talk Supply Chain team and bigger community. I'm leading a session on LTL. Very excited about that. My first time at Home Delivery World in Philadelphia. So if you're on site, reach out. Would love to catch up. I have tons of time to meet with folks on site there because I just have the one session. It's rare that I go to a conference and just have one session, so it's nice. Inland, we just earlier this week ended early bird pricing, but we still have advanced rate pricing. So please, if you're planning to come to the Inland Distribution Conference or Inland 24 in Chicago, September 30th through October 2nd, sign up now. You still get great discount on the overall price. Once again, we are really blowing out Inland this year. Have big plans on how to make it bigger and more valuable for everybody on site. So just reach out if you have any questions about it. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about coming. I think it's going to be the most valuable trucking, intermodal, LTL, drayage event in North America this year. So, and I know it's fall is a busy time for events. So I know it's difficult to pick which one. So let me, if I can help make that decision easier, just let me know. I will also be at the IPH conference in Hamburg in beginning of October. So would love to see you there as well. This is the biggest event for world ports in the annual calendar, right? This is an event that draws people in the port community from all over the world, literally every continent. And I'll be leading a couple sessions around technology, about data collaboration and cybersecurity, ever-present sort of subjects in the port community. So very, very excited to be there and hope you can join as well. There's all of these events. There's information in the link in the comments on how to sign up for those. Lastly, please, we had a nice little bump after TPM in terms of support for the Blended Pledge. This is the initiative that helps make sure that on-stage demographics at our industry events represent the demographics in the actual industry. And so it's not just a bunch of people that look like me on stage blathering on in deep baritone, but actually we have a mix of that represents what the industry actually looks like in reality. So it's a great initiative, helps support travel costs for people who don't have the budget to travel, but get invited to speak at industry events. This happens to me quite often where I invite someone and they say, can't do it, don't have the budget. So let's not let that be a hindrance. Click on the link in the comments to donate $5, $50, $500, $5 million, whatever you can afford. Okay. All right. No further ado. Let's get into news of the week. Always busy. I was actually just on the phone with one of my colleagues earlier today, catching up, and we were just talking about how crazy it's been from a news perspective this year, even over and above the Red Sea stuff and the Panama Canal and global wars and everything. It's like there's just a lot of stuff going on. So let me just dig into a couple of things that were interesting that I worked on over the last week or so. Prasad Golapalli, who some of you may be familiar with, he was the founder of a company called Trucker Tools, which built this app for drivers. And then that sort of morphed into this really valuable tool for freight brokers to use to get access to capacity because if you have all the drivers using the app, you all of a sudden can tap into a bunch of data around the movement and expected movement of drivers. Great company. We follow them and cover them a lot. He sold that company in 3 years ago to a private equity firm that is, taken it over and done great things with it as well. But that gave him an opening to start something new. And just last year, he and some others in the industry started a company called Q'd, which is focusing on truckload scheduling and appointment automation. So really fascinating subject that there's been a lot of activity in the industry to try to solve this long running issue of inefficiency around appointment scheduling. So this company called Q'd is started up. I wrote about this yesterday. They just announced their first sort of top 25 brokerage customer. Evidently, there's a lot of other companies using it already. So very excited to see next phase in Prasad's journey in terms of transforming the truckload industry. So definitely encourage you to read that. The next story I'll highlight is another interesting kind of wrinkle where CMA CGM announced jointly with a company called Open Envoy that works on invoice auditing automation. So you're noticing a theme here. Automation is kind of slowly percolating into the industry in numerous ways, and that ties into our guest today as well. But in this case, CMA is using Open Envoy to actually audit invoices that they are sending out to their key accounts before they've even sent them out. So in other words, skip that step of send out an inaccurate invoice, have the customer dispute it, then have to go through the whole process of figuring out who is right, who is wrong, having customers' money tied up potentially wrongly, right? Because they may have overpaid or may have been asked to overpay. So this is a big long-running issue in the ocean freight space about inaccurate billing. There's also a legal mandate around this. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 22 specified that carriers cannot send inaccurate invoices, that shippers do not have to pay those invoices if they're inaccurate. So there's going to be more onus on shipping lines to send out not just bills that have the right data elements, but also that they can verify are accurate. So very interesting, and I expect this to sort of permeate into the broader industry and brought more carriers essentially over time. Last story. Good friend of ours, JOC, Nicole Glenn, her company Candor Expedite. They focus on expedited freight services. They do all sorts of cool specialty stuff. We wrote about how they started a new service targeting food shippers, perishable shippers, using and there's some pictures of the boxes here, using a insulation sort of technology from a partner that they have in Europe that essentially can keep shipments, whether a small box or an entire pallet, at a constant temperature for up to 9 days, I believe, on the larger box size. So that negates the need to use reefer trucks. It negates the need to use tri-temp trucks if you have 3 types of goods that need to be kept at 3 different temperature levels or humidity levels. So super interesting, very innovative, and very seeming to get a lot of traction amongst sort of fast food retailers that need to deliver a whole bunch of different types of goods to their outlets on a daily, sometimes multi-day basis, instead of having to wait for a shipment on a scheduled service, get access to reefer capacity when it's available. You can now put this on any sort of mode of transit because it's insulated within the packaging itself. So really interesting. There's so many innovative solutions going on in the cold chain space, and definitely encourage you to read more about this and all these links are in the comments as well. All right, no further ado. I said before, this is literally the first time I've had any guest, and I've been doing this for I think 3 years now. The first time I've had any guest return for their second time, and no one better than my good friend Amy Morgan, who's VP and Head of Trade Compliance at a company called Altana. Amy, it's great to have you back.
Thank you. I'm honored to be your first repeat. That's high praise, Eric.
Well, I was saving this for someone who really deserved to be a repeat guest. So I appreciate you making some time. I know you're very busy. You seemingly always on the road. We were talking about that before we went live. All right. So in case people didn't catch the first time you were on the show, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself before we talk about what Altana is?
Yeah, you bet. So Amy Morgan, Vice President, Head of Trade Compliance at Altana. My job is really to identify ways to use Altana's technology to address real trade compliance problems that elevate and advance the role of the trade professional. I'm a licensed U.S. customs broker. Before Altana, I managed trade compliance for some industry giants, Amazon, Costco Wholesale, Nordstrom. Been in the business for 24-ish years. But what's really cool is that my journey led me to this fascinating intersection of AI and regulatory compliance, where I get to actually impact how AI is changing the way we think about and the way we approach trade work. So it's a more strategic career that people aspire to, not one that people fall into.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, we'll get into this because I think the role that AI and automation is playing in the trade compliance world is super fascinating. So we have lots to discuss on that. Just give people, in case they don't know, I know the last time you were on, Altana was in a different phase of its growth and sort of brand recognition. Obviously, things have progressed since then. What is Altana? What do you do? What does the company do?
Sure. In short, Altana is a tech company. We're headquartered here in Brooklyn, New York, and we have a really big mission. So our mission is to build a prosperous world where commerce is based on trust and transparency, where buyers and suppliers and all the global supply chain stakeholders work from one unified common view of trade activity. We say we want to power globalization 2.0, right? We want to define a new globalization, this new era of globalization, as one that's built around trusted networks. So Altana uses AI. We've built a map of the world's of the global supply chain. From that map, we can derive various insights to meet various use cases. And when I was on the show last, I think we were talking a lot about forced labor, right? I mean, the UFLPA had just been passed, and that's one of the big use cases for our technology. And since then, we've grown dramatically. We're servicing not just the private sector, but also the public sector. We've got several government clients. And we've grown beyond forced labor. So we're looking at using the value chains that I think we're going to talk a little bit about, that Altana illuminates, to help companies, yes, of course, avoid forced labor in their extended trade networks, but also how do we avoid products that were harvested from deforested lands, or how do we track and measure carbon emissions? Pretty much any policy or any regulation that requires seeing your multi-tier value chain of your products is what Altana is looking to support. So that's just a kind of a quick overview, but
it's not necessarily an easy thing to explain, right? So just to go a little bit deeper in terms of like Altana's place in this great big world of organizations and all the systems they use. So your customers are government agencies, logistics providers, shippers, anyone else, any big categories I'm missing beyond those?
No, those are the big categories. You got it. Those are the three main ones. We do have a business that handles insurance that's growing and doing some pretty exciting things, but I think you covered it.
Okay. And then, so let's maybe think about this from the shipper perspective. How does Altana fit with like something they may already be using, whether it's a global trade management system or an ERP or some other, or maybe just a bunch of spreadsheets? I don't know. Like how do you interact with the systems they are already using?
Well, so kind of all the above, I suppose. I mean, Altana is really cool, even just on its own, even without any integrations.
Yep.
We've come a long way in our interface and helping people learn how to interact with this new concept of value chains, something we've never had to know or see before. So we've done a pretty good job with that ourselves. But some companies are integrating with their ERPs, like they want to feed all of their supplier data or all their customer data into our platform, and then we'll take it from there. So that's one way. And then you can take those insights and feed them back into whatever system. And when I say ERP, I really mean any operating system. It could be a GTM, TMS, a WMS, an OMS, like it could be any of those things. But using it on its own is pretty cool too.
Yep. I would imagine if a company is using you, they probably have different users, some using it standalone, some using it, as a feeding data into it. Right. So there's different personas have different views of it, I would imagine. Right. Okay, cool. Well, I think that gives a good level set for what it is you do. I think the topic of understanding your supplier network and how that is, a potentially a risk kind of thing to manage. I mean, it always has been a risk, but I think over the last few years, it's really surfaced into, it's not just these two countries that we have, that have been sort of pariahs in the world that we have to stay away from. Now there's risks around every corner potentially. And until we know what that multi-tier supplier network looks like, we don't know how much risk we are exposed to, right? So why do you think that's become a more prominent thing to manage over the last few years?
Well, so the first thing I want to do is reframe really quickly. So we're very used
to— Feel free to correct me.
No, not a correction, just a
yeah.
We're all very used to talking about our multi-tier supplier network, or we need to know our supply chain, or map your supply chain. That sort of, we're used to that. That's what we say. We've always said that. And my reframe that I suggest is that rather than talking about supplier risk per se, can we pivot the conversation to talk about value chains? And this is why, and this is a new thing. This has been a new revelation, even for me, that it's good to know your suppliers. It's good to know who I'm working with and who they're working with and who they're working with. That is true. But in order to make it relevant to your business, it's not just who you're working with. It's what are you getting from them, and what products are their suppliers getting from them, and so on and so forth. So you can make it relevant to you. So it's not just who am I doing business with. It's is there any risk in a specific product's value chain that could impact my bottom line? Maybe it's my top performing product, or it's a super high profile product, or maybe my risk is way out in my tier 4 of a product that's not as important. So I think that's like the newest thing that people need to start getting their heads around, is that yes, good to know your supply chain, but now let's make it relevant. Let's make it specific to our businesses. So I've been doing all the traveling you mentioned earlier. That's what I'm talking about. I'm really trying to evangelize this concept of knowing more than just your supply chain, right? So, so you asked why.
So just so I'm clear, so you're saying it's not just about what your network looks like, but having your network in the context of all of the other supply chains swirling around it. Is that?
Yes, and making that network relevant, so that, okay, from this, so I'm not just doing business with this supplier, I'm doing business with this supplier to support this product. Mm-hmm. And I can see where my tier 1 supplier is getting some very critical raw materials that go into it. Or I can see the tier 3 or tier 4 is a steel product, or is a sanctioned entity, or something that could impact my product. But maybe that's an important product to me. Maybe it's not an important product to me. I need to make it relevant to my business. So if we look at everything on a product level, we look at our value chains that way. I think that is more impactful than just knowing who we're doing business with.
So that helps you prioritize kind of which,
prioritize, helps you focus, helps you, maybe I'm interested in deforestation on certain goods. Maybe I'm interested in decarbonization on other goods. Maybe I'm interested in forced labor in these goods. It helps you really look at your business and the products that you trade in,
Mm-hmm.
Then look at the chains associated with each of those products so that you can make decisions based on that, not just these broad, oh, you've got this risky entity out here somewhere in your chain. I don't know how is that meaningful to me? I don't know. Like,
maybe it might not be meaningful at all, even though
right.
It seems like a red flag. It might not be meaningful.
That's right. That's right. So make it meaningful. But yes, I mean, either whether you're looking at your extended supply chain or you're looking at your product value chain, you mentioned, why was this so hard? Or, well, I think you asked, why is it important first?
Yeah.
And I think the reason why it's so important is all the new regulations that trade compliance people, that supply chain people, procurement people are dealing with right now all require it, right? Never before, like in my career, I never had to construct a value chain for a product unless it was like a trade program verification or something. Customs asked a question, I had to recreate the chain or something, but it was a one-off, right? And now with the UFLPA in the US and forced labor regulations around the world,
by the way, that's the Uyghur
Forced
Labor
Act. That's right.
Convention Act. Yes, sorry.
So if it's forced labor, if it's carbon emissions, if it's conflict minerals, if it's deforestation, if it's cybersecurity, all of these regulations that have either been passed, are being passed, or are on the horizon, all require value chain visibility. All the due diligence legislation as part of the EU's Green Deal, all requires value chain visibility. So now everybody, it's no longer nice to have or a one-off. It's a mandate. It's a license to do business. So that's the why it's important. But the why it was hard was even back in the days when I had to recreate these things for a CF28 or something for a trade program. It was manual. It was expensive. If I had to do it at scale, it was manual. It was me sending a spreadsheet of questions to my supplier, hoping they give me honest answers. And maybe they had to send a spreadsheet of questions to their supplier and so on. And maybe hopefully they give honest answers, right? So it was static. So even if you were lucky enough to get all that information,
it might have been obsolete the next day.
It's obsolete, you know, the moment it was created. So this whole notion of mapping is this old school sort of way of thinking. And fortunately for us, we're living in a moment where artificial intelligence can kind of crunch all that data for us and give us a really more than a head start. Really enables us to see these things so we can actually start to act on them first. So that's why it was hard. Why it's important.
I think what you're sort of getting at is like my favorite pet topic in the world of trade compliance is like, historically, it always seemed to me from the outside looking in that companies addressed it. I mean, even if they had an expert like you in-house, that they were, you know, everything seemed to come from a reactive position. Oh, we are, you know, we got audited. We had this violation and now we need to put in place something, as opposed to now there seems to be a path to be a little bit more proactive on things if a company can reorient itself around that.
More than a little. It's an absolute necessity. Some companies have been doing it all along, very few of them. Some are coming along, some will take longer, but that's where we're going.
Not a choice anymore. Right. Okay. You've alluded a little bit to UFLPA, which is the UFLPS.
UFLPA.
Make sure I have that right. That had just been passed, I think, months before you came on last time. So that was sort of the driver for having you on the last time you were on the show. Where are we with that? And what are some of the other kind of regulatory mandates that are sort of driving a lot of interest in what you're doing, or just in general driving a different approach to compliance than existed before?
You know, UFLPA, it's funny you asked that question, you know, today. Because when I came on in September of 22, the UFLPA was passed in June of 22, and we are just now approaching its 2-year anniversary.
Yeah.
So back then, when we think about back then, most companies were kind of in this wait and see mode. Nobody really understood it. Companies were like, are they
really going to enforce it? Yeah.
Right? Like well, we're just going to wait and see if customs actually does anything about it. And now nearly, here we are 2 years later, and significant progress. Like it is a totally different environment. So I knew you were going to ask this question, so I have a couple thoughts prepared. And one is on the topic of just comprehension. So companies have a much better understanding now of what the UFLPA even is and what it means to their business. And it's usually the trade people, it's sometimes the supply chain people, but I see them educating their stakeholders. Like they're actively pursuing compliance, which is fantastic, obviously. And they are talking the talk. They realize we need to trace our value chains to prove that they're free of forced labor, just in case we do get a detention or we get a seizure or we have to prove, we have to rebut the presumption that the UFLPA requires. So I'm seeing people ask for help. I see the people hiring lawyers and compliance experts and really like internalizing that being proactive is not only the right thing to do for their business, but it protects their reputation. And it's actually like a marketing thing. So the other thing I'm seeing is people are taking steps now to comply. Nobody's waiting and seeing anymore. Compliance is still challenging, but I see people putting in programs like robust due diligence processes. They're working with their suppliers, maybe for the first time ever. They're conducting third-party audits where they can, and they're investing in technologies, ours included, for the traceability they need for compliance. And then there's the enforcement side. So you can't talk about a compliance and then not talk about enforcement. So CBP, U.S. Customs, has been actively enforcing the UFLPA. They are detaining shipments. They are requiring proof of compliance. So it remains a priority in the United States. And I don't see that changing with the presidential election because forced labor is one of those bipartisan issues and support from both sides.
No one's campaigning on more forced labor.
That's right. That's right. So I don't see that going anywhere. But what else is happening is the U.S.'s approach is being watched by other countries. So in the last year, we've seen Canada and Mexico introduce regulations under the USMCA specific to forced labor. Not a tremendous amount of enforcement there, but that'll for sure grow. We saw the EU, they've passed a forced labor ban, a really broad forced labor ban. Will be interesting to see how that manifests. And then there's several other types of forced labor legislation being floated all over the place. So it's a good thing. But what is really interesting about that is the more countries that start to add this sort of legislation makes it harder for companies who were previously maybe picking and choosing what countries they sent their compliant products to, and then they'd send their non-compliance elsewhere. I would expect that at some point that cost of compliance will actually be less than maintaining different chains for different regions, right? But I just kind of put a few of those thoughts together. I think did you ask about like other?
Yeah, so I want to go into like what the next thing that should be on people's radar or next thing that should be on people's radar. But real quickly before I do, how would you characterize? So the UFLPA focuses a lot on the company that is responsible for managing their suppliers. How would you say that the supplier base has adapted to the regulation in terms of, are we now seeing companies that have taken it seriously as suppliers are winning business, that ones that don't, or is everybody sort of taking it seriously because this major consuming nation has said, no, you can't use this type of labor anymore?
So I don't know. I can't with certainty say, yes, there are all these suppliers that are taking it seriously, but here's what I do know, that our customers who are using us to identify where they may have forced labor risk in their chains, they're using the data they get from our system, and they're going to their tier one and they're saying, listen, here's the thing. Either, I have a zero tolerance policy. I don't even want to investigate if this company is for real exposed or not. Swap them out for somebody else.
Right.
So it's really the importer that's telling their tier one supplier to make changes
So even the whiff of exposure is
In some
like
cases,
forcing those decisions. Yeah.
I mean, some customers, they have zero tolerance. Other customers, and I haven't really seen a pattern like in industry or anything, but some companies have that zero tolerance policy. Others are like, we want to mitigate, we want to remediate the issue. We want to work with our suppliers to fix the problem, not just get rid of it. So I see that across the board. But if the suppliers are in fact taking it seriously, they're doing so because the importer is now empowered.
Yep.
They see what they couldn't see before, and they're mandating change.
Yep. It's not just a trust us, we're fine. Now it's like, no, we can see that we can't trust you. So,
or prove it, right? Like,
prove it,
you do business with this like potentially risky actor. Prove to me that the business you do with them does not touch my stuff, right? Like, they're empowered to ask that now.
Interesting. Okay, so what should be next on people's radar?
Oh my gosh! So
I know it's like we could take 40 minutes just.
I know, right? Well, so I'll draw this quick comparison. So I went to the CBP Trade Summit, and I knew what was coming. The themes this year was forced labor. The theme was narcotics. So how do we prohibit the importation of illegal narcotics or the precursors to narcotics? So these social issues are really important in the U.S. I went to the ICPA Europe conference in Dublin, and that whole agenda was climate. So everything that compliance people in Europe are talking about right now is the EU Green Deal, deforestation, CBAM, so the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So
bring in all the narcotics you want as long as it's climate friendly. No,
well, nobody said that, but it was not on the agenda. That was not a topic of discussion. So if for the US people who are listening, right? Like, okay, so we've dealt with forced labor. Maybe you've had to deal with some narcotics stuff, maybe not, doesn't impact everybody. But the next thing that's coming is carbon. And I think the Biden administration has been pretty vocal about their intentions. And if Europe is doing it, the US is probably going to follow suit in some way, shape, or form. And that's where I would that's where I'm turning my attention.
Right.
Like, how do we calculate our carbon emissions on our value chains? How do we use our value chains to assess whether or not we're contributing to deforestation? And I say we, the collective we, like, but I think
it's interesting in your role because obviously we've had guests on the show who are focused on the decarb challenge, shipping at an importer level. They tend to tackle this as an issue that's not intertwined with trade compliance, right? It's like a separate thing that needs to be managed alongside. But you're in an interesting position because you can help companies manage both of those at the same time, right? I would imagine.
It's the same. They need the same thing. It's just different data on top of it. It's like it's carbon data on top of your value chain. It's forced labor data on top of your value chain. It's deforestation data on top of your value chain. So, I mean, yeah, it's super interesting. It's exciting. But you said something. You said it's not typically trade compliance. And that might be the case in some companies where having to report on their carbon is a logistics function or it is a supply chain function, but it's regulatory. And if they're doing the reporting, they're doing so, it's regulatory compliance. So whether you're technically in the compliance department,
right,
or not, it's still a regulatory compliance element. So just point of clarity.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I think my sense is that if I asked 100 companies, where does carbon emission compliance sit, that it would mostly sit in logistics or supply chain. It wouldn't necessarily sit in the hands of trade compliance, right? So, or even like some more amorphous compliance.
Or think
maybe I'm wrong on this. Actually,
I mean, you read my fun blog post, and maybe we'll talk.
Yes,
about
I wanted to ask you about this blog.
But think about even more upstream than that. I mean, yes, you have to do the reporting and all these things, and based on the business that you're doing. But what if you could make a different sourcing decision based on a particular supplier's carbon footprint?
Mm-hmm.
Would you pick somebody that has greener practices, even if you have to pay a little more? You could use tools like ours. I mean, that's one of the things that I talk about all the time too, is you're pushing what is trade compliance upstream now. And so now sourcing people are actually doing trade compliance work because they need to see what is the, because ultimately I'm going to have to report this regulatory requirement at some point. Could I make a different decision upstream? So sourcing is trade compliance, logistic is trade compliance, it's supply chain is trade compliance.
This is like the white papers that used to write when I was with American Shipper about like bringing all this stuff more upstream. Like, why is stuff thrown in the laps of trade compliance professionals at the last possible moment?
We didn't have the technology to do it then, right? Like we do now. We actually do now. So
well, there's also, to your point, also there's just more regulatory mandate to do it as well, which is also unfortunately the way that most people sort of get compelled. All right, you referred. I wanted to ask you. You wrote something to the effect of trade compliance needs a publicist, something like that, right? What do you mean by that? What was this blog post all about?
Yeah, so when I was so again, all my travels that I was doing, you go to all the networking receptions and I talked to a bunch of different people. I'm talking to trade people, I'm talking to government people, I'm talking to supply chain people, and everybody was struggling and had all this anxiety for the same reason, right? These are laws, we don't know how to comply with these laws, we're all stressed out. And I found myself saying over and over again, well, dang, trade compliance needs a publicist because trade compliance is so used to being that afterthought, that group that, you only call me when something bad happens at the very end. Like you've already made all the strategic decisions. You already know who you're sourcing from. The product's been designed, engineered, purchased. It gets held, then you call me. But now the whole idea is the whole notion of trade compliance is this back house, back office, afterthought, and it needs to be rebranded, right? Trade compliance today is not that. Trade compliance today is not trade compliance, it's trade strategy. It's how do we implement trade considerations earlier across all the different functions of our companies to make better choices so that it's not just this burden that, somebody at the end of the chain, when something gets held or detained at the border, then we scramble to take care of it. No, right? Like, could we consider with better information, sourcing from a different country to reduce our costs? Like we could use a trade program or we could source from a different country if we knew to think about it. Or could we tariff engineer our products if we knew that what the impact on our landed cost could be? And I know these things are like obvious for a lot of trade people, but we're so
and also in retrospect, right? Like everyone's listening, like of course that makes sense, right? But in reality, that's not how the processes work.
No, it's not, and it might be at some companies are better than others, obviously. But we've always wanted to have a seat at the table, but we don't have budget, we don't have tools, but the technology's caught up now. Yeah. So maybe trade compliance doesn't get to buy some fancy tool like Altana or something, but the sourcing team could. And does the sourcing team want to make different decisions? Do they want to make better decisions? So the whole idea was trade compliance as a profession is not it's no longer an afterthought and never will be again. So it's time to change the way we think about it and make it trade strategy, or we're trade engineers. Obviously still a compliance component to it.
But that's just part of it. It's not.
That's right. But if it's infused throughout the different functions of a company, not only is the company making what I hope would be better decisions for the world, themselves, humanity, but also making more compliant decisions earlier, reducing the negative impact down.
So as you were describing this, I was thinking, I was fortunate enough to be invited to a freight forwarder event, like an internal freight forwarder event, where I got to talk to some of their customers in spring. And it was really eye-opening that these customers were not concerned about what was going on in the Panama Canal or the Red Sea. What they were mostly concerned about was how tariffs were going to be affected on their products over the next 9 months, right? Obviously, there's an election. I don't think either candidate is looking at reducing tariffs, right? So they're all figuring out, like, what does this mean? And that it's a perfect example. I mean, one of them, we even said, we are literally on a 6-month basis, just waiting to see if our product is exempt from, this review process that happens that just got announced earlier this week. If we keep being exempt, or if all of a sudden our margin on that product shrinks considerably, right? So that's a situation where if you had a trade strategist rather than a trade compliance person, you might be making different decisions potentially. Maybe not. Maybe that's the only decision you can make, but at least you would know better. So
or you could have options, and you know what those options are earlier. So when everyone talks about reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, diversifying their supplier base, do so from a place of education and information, not just picking another one just to have another as a backup, but pick a strategic one. Like, oh, if I go here, my cost is going to be this, but if something happens here, I could go here and my cost might be this. But like using these trade considerations to make better, different choices, and thereby organically moving what we historically think of as trade compliance upstream. So I'm kind of in love with this idea. I wrote this blog post after like one conference. It was like 3:00. I'm in the morning. I'm in Dublin, and it's gotten a lot of response. The comments are really interesting. A lot of people have been feeling the exact same thing at the exact same time. Because of all this new legislation. So there's this groundswell now, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think you talked about it right before we went online. Is this the breakthrough moment, right? Like,
feels like it.
Yeah. All right. Well, when we have you back for a third time, we'll come back and see whether you were right or not, or whether we're still running in place 2 years from now, or whenever you're back. I suspect not. I suspect you're onto something here. Okay, so I will be honest, I can't even remember. You know, this is how I end every show. Favorite musician or band. I can't even remember who you said last time, but you can't say the same.
Okay, so
remind me who you said last time.
Remind you, yeah. So last time we talked about, because I had just seen the Foo Fighters, and so Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters, love. And
there's been some tragedy since then, unfortunately.
No, I wasn't really a fan of the latest album either. So
I love it. I actually love it. Yeah, actually, I love it. I really love it.
I know it's Taylor Hawkins, like loyalist and stuff.
I am too, but Josh Freese is good too.
Well, this time I thought I would share, because we're friends and I have zero shame, and I'm not embarrassed of this. About a genre. It's not one band.
Okay.
It's not one musician. It's a genre. So I think I mentioned I have this guilty pleasure, this long love affair with yacht rock.
Yeah, absolutely.
We didn't really talk about it. It was kind of like slipped in at the end, but yeah. So I've got a thing with yacht rock.
Like Christopher Cross kind of
right?
stuff.
That late 70s, early 80s, breezy, drinking a glass of rosé on the water somewhere, like Toto, Kenny Loggins.
Toto, absolutely, yeah.
Steely Dan. So yeah.
We actually had someone, a guest, say Steely Dan was their favorite, and he was born he's like 30, so he was born well after their heyday, obviously. So, and big fan. So that was good. It was like very encouraging to know that some of this stuff has legs. But yeah, I do find myself sometimes like listening to the 70s, like Jim Croce kind of like stations,
and feels good. And I always like a good reason to practice my air sax. If you have a Peloton, there are yacht rock rides. I take them on repeat.
That's amazing.
Sing loudly.
That's good. Well, as a kid of the late 70s and early 80s, I very much appreciate that genre. So yes, we will add that to the mix.
Right.
This playlist that I keep threatening to release based on all the guests' choices. So it would be very eclectic based on. I think we've only had the only repeat favorite band is Coldplay, I believe. So yeah, otherwise everyone has their own favorite, which is cool. It shows how unique everybody's taste is in the industry. So well, Amy, this is the reason why I had you back. This is the reason why you were our first repeat guest. Thank you so much. You're always
so much
treasure trove of information and perspective on things. So hope you get to not travel for a while, because I know you've been on the road for a while. So great to see you. How can people reach out to you and find out more about you and Altana?
So Amy Morgan on LinkedIn. very active. You can totally find me, or amy@altana.ai is my email. And if you can't find me, you're just not trying hard enough. I mean, I'm out there. If you can't find me, they can call you.
Look for her blog post.
Look for my blog post. Or call Eric. He knows how to reach me.
Yeah, if you have trouble, get in touch with me. I'll connect you to. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, okay?
Likewise. Thanks a lot, Eric.
Bye. All right. Amy's great. Definitely reach out to her if you have any questions about what Altana is doing or just trade compliance, trade strategy questions. Let's put it that way. All right. Dad joke of the week time. How many storms? So I missed, somehow our last show was right before May 4th, May the 4th be with you. So I felt like I needed to do a retrospective Star Wars joke. So how many stormtroopers does it take to change a light bulb? None, because they're all on the dark side. Get it? Get it? Tried my best. I hadn't heard that one before. Okay. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Always appreciate your support for the show. Thank you to Nicole, my awesome producer, the best in the business. Thank you to Amy for making time again today and lightening us all. Thank you to Sarah and the Let's Talk Supply Chain team. And I will be with you in 2 weeks with another great guest. So everyone have a great weekend wherever you are. Talk to you soon. Bye.